Hi everyone, Brian here with a slightly different video this time. I was reading through the comment section of my last video, link up here if you want to check it out, and one user pointed out that there aren't a lot of short Cubase tutorials on YouTube, the kind that you would probably see for other DAWs. And while I don't 100% agree, because there's so many great YouTubers that are Cubase focused, like Chris Salim and Dom Segalis, that do a fantastic job covering Cubase and its amazing features, and also Steinberg are having a weekly live session with Greg Undo, and while it's a little longer than a short video, it does have so much value. But nonetheless, it got me thinking, what can I bring to the table when it comes to Cubase tutorials? I thought of doing the very basic stuff. Quick and easy, bada bing, bada boom, done. But that felt a little boring to me. And so instead of doing that, in this video, I'm starting a little mini-series where I'm covering the very basic features of Cubase, but I'm going to make it super interesting. How basic? In this video, I'm going to show you how to cut stuff in Cubase. But before you click away, you really want to stay tuned because I promise you, there are some tricks here that you don't know and you really want to stick around to learn them, whether you're new to Cubase or music production altogether, or you're an established producer, master Cubase user with awards sitting on your shelf. I promise you, you're going to learn new things. So without further ado, let's start with the very basics. Okay, one last thing before we dive in. The only thing that you have to remember is that anything that I'm about to show you today, you can customize to any keyboard shortcut, any Stream Deck button, or MIDI controller, or touchscreen. You can do whatever you want. This is what I love about Cubase. So if you're coming from a different DAW, or you're just starting to make music and the default keyboard shortcuts don't make sense, you can customize it, you can make it your own, and this is kind of like what makes Cubase so great in my opinion. So let's dive right into Cubase. So here we are in Cubase in a random project that I have loaded up, and we want to start slicing things like this audio clip. Great. Let's go to our split tool right here at the top. Cut, cut, cut. Easy. Go back to our selector tool, move things around. Yeah. Great. This is a little too slow to me to go to the top, so you can always right-click anywhere, even if it's on an audio clip. There's Tools menu again, and you can hit the Split tool, and then you can start cutting things. You can also select when you're with your Split tool, and then say we select these three, we can slice them together. If I'll hit this now, because they're not selected together, it won't work. But as long as they're selected and it's under kind of like where I'm cutting, they'll cut together. And this is great. And then I can go back to my object selection tool and I can start moving things around, fade stuff, whatever you want. Great, but this is still a little too slow for me. So as you probably noticed, we have numbers next to our tools. So the split tool is actually number 3. So if I hit 3 on my keyboard, great, I can now do that, cut things around. Fantastic. Go to number 1, and then I'm back to my selector tool, move things around, fade, do whatever I want. This is great. But the cool thing about Cubase, remember that I told you that everything is customizable. You can customize which number does what, and they don't even have to be numbers. So if I go into my key command dialog in Cubase, give it a sec, it takes a while to load because there's so many items that you can customize. If I search for split tool, as you can see, split tool number 3, and now I can assign a different number, like 0 if I want. Now it's the drumstick tool that I never use. I can hit assign and it will assign it, and then it will no longer do that, the drumstick tool. If I want it, I'm not going to do that, but this is how you can customize it. And so if you don't like the number 3, you are usually cutting and then going back to your selector tool. You can have it on number 2, you can have it on command 2, you can do whatever you want. This is why I love Cubase so much. But doing it this way, going to a different tool, I usually don't do that unless it's for other tools. I don't do it for the split tool. The way that I split stuff is with holding Option or Alt on Windows, and then here we are. We have our cut tool, we can cut stuff, we can select with our selector tool, which makes more sense to me, and then cut stuff together, just like we were with our split tool. And this is great. Let's undo that. And the very cool thing about Cubase, as you know, everything is customizable. So you can also decide which modifier does which tool. So if we go to our preferences and we go to tool modifiers, as you can see, split tool is doing option, but say I want it to be with control. I can now assign that instead of hitting alt. I can hold down control or command if I want to, and it will go to our split tool. You can have a different tool go to option if you want your erase tool, or your glue tool can be on a different modifier. And so again, Cubase, you can do whatever you want, you can customize it the way that you want, but the way that I like it, and this is how it comes right out of the box, hold down option, cut stuff, cut stuff, cut stuff. This is, I think, the way that it needs to be. Well, if we can do this with holding down Option or Alt, why even have a cut tool? Because this is so much more efficient, right? Well, say this starts on bar 4 till bar 6, and I want to cut this into 8s. Instead of going each 8th note and cutting it, the way that you can do this in Cubase is going to your cut tool and then holding down Option or Alt. And now you can see we have little lines on our scissors. And so if I have Option or Alt held down, I can cut this, and now it'll cut it into 8th notes. And you can do it with 16th notes. You can do it with dotted 8 notes. And then it'll end where your clip ends. In our case, it's bar 6. If we went all the way to where this clip ends, which is right here, and let's do 16th notes, it's all cut to 16th notes until our next clip. And I use this feature a lot. And then once these are all cut, you can do whatever you want with them. You can fade them, you can make them shorter, but this is such a fast way of cutting things in a repeating pattern. Another great feature of that is with MIDI stuff. So if I go to my beat right here, I have my hi-hat on a separate MIDI clip. It doesn't really have to be, but just for this demonstration, it's going to make things a little more clear to see. But say I want this third hi-hat to be stuttered or re-triggered, kind of like how you would have with a lot of 808 beats. What I can do is turn off snapping, which basically means that I cut things outside my quantized value. And so I can do whatever cut that I want, whatever length. And so I can do that with disengaging this right here, or with the keyboard shortcut J, or again, Cubase, you can have it in whatever keyboard shortcut that you want. You can customize this. So let's disengage this, go to my split tool, and then again, hold down Alt. And so now I can have this third hi-hat be split into even random values, right? So now this sounds like this. If I want to make it any shorter, I can just have it like this. Yeah, way more quickly. You can even go to audio range. So if we zoom way in on our hi-hat, let's do even more, and then cut it here. Let's exaggerate it here. So now this is probably within audio range. So yeah, go crazy. This is a really, really great way of doing this. And this re-triggered kind of slicing thing is really fun to explore. You can even do each one with a different cut, and then you have a different variation each time that you play your hi-hat. Yeah, really cool. Go crazy. This is a feature that I used a lot. As long as we're talking about MIDI, let me show you how MIDI cutting is handled in Cubase, because MIDI is different than audio and there's more variables to consider, and there's a bunch of ways that you could do that. So let me show you just that. So let's start slicing this MIDI clip. Very easy, very, basic stuff. Yes, you can do that. You can select multiple MIDI clips and then you can slice them together. You can even select audio and MIDI and you can slice them together. This is great. Same goes for notes. If you select multiple notes, you can cut them. If you select just part of the notes, you can, as long as they're selected, it'll cut it. And even if you have stuff selected, you can still cut things that aren't, which is great. Yeah, this is basic stuff. Maybe you do this, maybe you didn't, but now we're all wiser, now we're all smarter, and we know how to cut notes in Cubase. This is great. But the weird thing happened right here when I started slicing things, and then this does not behave the way that you would think it would behave, right? Why don't I have data right here? Why is this empty? Why is this just this little thing? Well, if we look at my piano roll, as you can see, I purposely did this for this demonstration, but there are so many use cases and so many ways that you can write MIDI, right? So you can see these two notes start before this beat, and then this note goes across both chords. And so if I cut this on the beat, well, this starts before the beat, so it's right there, and then the note goes across, and this is great. And so we don't have any data here. That kind of makes sense, right? Well, you would probably say no, and this is stupid, and Cubase is stupid, but wait with that thought. What we can do is very easily, we can just cut everything, and then we can cut the MIDI, and then it'll work. And this is also stupid because it's adding an extra step, right? Well, if we go to our settings And under editing, we go to MIDI, and then we go to split MIDI events. And we can also do split MIDI controllers. Now, if I split it, it behaves the way that you would think. The only thing to remember is that, say we're splitting this chord into eighths, it'll re-trigger every time that you cut it, right? Because now we have these notes, and this clip plays this notes. And because this clip plays this note, there's a note on and a note off. So just like a thing to consider is that if you have this like that, yes, it'll split it the way that you would think, but it'll re-trigger stuff. And you don't always want that, right? Because let's disengage this. And oh, also, you can have these two options triggered, or rather toggled, in your keyboard shortcuts. So if we search for split MIDI events, now you can see we have split MIDI events and split MIDI controllers. So you can actually toggle those settings with a keyboard shortcut, touchscreen, MIDI controller, Stream Deck, whatever you want. And this is fantastic. How great is that you can actually change settings? This is what I love about Cubase. You can actually change setting toggles with a shortcut. You don't have to go to your settings and find it again and search and remember where it is. You can just do it here, and this is fantastic. But why would you actually want it any other way? Well, let's say that you played something and then say this note from the previous chord spills over a little bit. Well, if I had it in the previous mode and I would split it here, I would have a little bit of thing to delete, and it's an extra step. Where, if I have it off, I can slice it right here, and then I only have what I want. Yes, I am missing this note, but I find it a little easier to just split this note and then slice a little bit before, delete this, and then you have just the chord that you want starting right at the beat. And so I think this is kind of like a great way. You don't have to choose one or the other, and then you can kind of think of what you want to do and then act in the fastest way, because you have all these tools to do whatever you want and to cut things in the way that best fits this scenario. So this is how you would cut MIDI clips and the ways that you can cut MIDI clips in Cubase. Another great way to cut stuff in Cubase is splitting stuff at the playhead, which is a method that I use a lot. So say that I put my cursor, or rather my playhead, wherever I want it to be. I select these three clips, and then I hit Alt-X, or Option X on Mac, which is the default shortcut. Again, Cubase, you can change it to whatever shortcut you want. You can put it on a Stream Deck, on a MIDI device, whatever you want. So Alt-X will split those three. Great. It'll also work with MIDI devices, and so I really like doing this method for a few reasons. One, usually I would work where I already want to cut. So if I go here and then I want to cut stuff, my playhead is usually where I want to cut stuff. This is kind of the way that I work, and it's nice to have that tool. It's another option. I don't have to hold stuff. I'm already there, so it's very easy. But if you don't have anything selected and you hit Alt-X, it'll cut everything. So from MIDI parts to audio, and yeah, all the way through your project, wherever your playhead is. If you have nothing selected, it'll just split everything down the middle, down where the playhead is, which is great. Another great way of using this is I have two shortcuts to advance my playhead by my quantize value. So let's go with user quantize, and if I'm on 16th, it will advance 16th. If I'm on quarter, it will advance in quarter notes. And so usually what I would do, let's go 16th. I would find like different patterns to cut stuff. And so now we're on 16th. So I can do Alt-X and then 3 and then 2 and 1 and 3 and 2 and 1. And so it's kind of like an easy way. Maybe there's a loop with a cowbell. It's not like every eighths, but it has its own pattern. So it's easy to cut stuff how you want it. And then you can, do whatever you want. You can fade them. You can make them shorter. So this is a kind of like an easy way to get different cuts really quickly that are on the beat, and you don't have to like hold Alt and then is this here, is this not? This is kind of how I would use split at playhead. And a little tip to changing your shortcuts: if you do any shortcut that you want to change, so Alt-X, and then you open your key command dialog, it'll actually load up selecting the last shortcut that you use. So this is, if you're not sure what it's called, but you know the shortcut for it, you don't have to like, oh, is it split on Playhead, split on cursor? You just use the shortcut that you know that you hate, and then you load up the key commands dialog, and then it'll already be selected there. So this is a great tip for changing key commands on Cubase, but this is not about key commands, this is about cutting. So let's go to the next method of cutting stuff. If you're using Ableton, or maybe you're an Ableton user eyeing Cubase, or if you have a weird friend that uses Cubase and you produce stuff together and you hate Cubase, this is probably for you. So remember at the beginning, I showed you that you can change to the cut tool using the number 3 and then go back to number 1. So by default, number 2 is your range selector tool. And so this is kind of like how you would select a range in Ableton. So you can do the same with Cubase. So you can basically select a range, a bunch of tracks, or maybe just one, but let's choose these 3, and then you can move stuff. And this by default does not have a keyboard shortcut for whatever reason. I chose Shift X because I'm already using a lot of Alt X for the cut at Playhead. But basically now if I hit Shift X, it'll split just here, which is great. And then if you don't have any range selected, but you just have a single point on a single track, it'll split it right where it's selected, which is fantastic. You can do the same with no range, but across a few tracks, which is great. And then what I like about this, and if you're kind of like an Ableton user and you don't want to switch tools around, you do have the combined selection tool, which basically now you can see both of them are selected. And so now each track is split between the bottom half is the selector tool, where the top half is your range selector tool for each track, right? So as you can see, range selector, and then bottom half is the selector tool. Range selector, selector. And so now you don't have to kind of think of what you're doing. I don't really like this way of handling your selector tool. I'm already accustomed to just switching between the two, but you can definitely do that, and it's very, very effective. And so this is another way that you can cut stuff, especially if you're going with a bigger range, but you only want your synths that are up here. Maybe you just want that section, right? Cut, done. Great, fantastic. Love that. Let's go to the next method. This next one is really short, but it's really, really cool. And I'm so glad that we have this because we didn't used to have this before. So with the introduction of Cubase 12, now we can cut the head or the tail of any clip to the playhead. So say I have my famous 3 clips right here, and I wanna trim these 3 clips to the playhead, the start of them, right? So now we can do just that. But what's cool about it is that it retained our fade values. So let's go with a longer fade. And this has no fades at all, right? If I trim this to the start, if I trim the start to the playhead, now same fade values, this has no fades. Great. It does the same with cut the tail to the playhead, but let's say this has a longer fade and this has an even longer fade, right? Let's go here and trim the tail to the playhead, and now it retained all of our fade values, and this is great. If your fade is longer than your clip after you trimmed it, it'll just go all the way, which I think, yeah, this is probably how I want it to behave. But this is great. I love using this for vocal stacks or any kind of like, if I'm recording a lot of brass, if you have a lot of strings or anything, or even a drum set that you recorded and you want to trim everything to a specific point. This is a great way of doing this because it saves you time. You can definitely do it with Alt X like I showed you before and then delete it, but this saves you one step. You don't have to delete the stuff that remains before the playhead. Yeah, and so if you want to configure this in Cubase, the way that you would find it is cut head and cut tail. If you search for those, it's under edit and you can configure those, but I love this feature, and now with the introduction of Cubase 12, I use it a lot, so now you can use it too. Finally, this one is not really cutting in the way that I showed you up until now, but it does have to deal with slicing stuff and rearranging, and it's a really cool method that not a lot of people know, and I think more people should know about this because it's really, really useful, especially when you're starting to develop your track, your song, your whatever. So what we would do is we go and we would add an arranger track that you never ever did before, and you are going to start by drawing sections of your song. I'll just do random ones because this is just a beat with loops, but if you have verse, chorus, whatever you want, and then you can rename them right here. So this is, and so now they're all labeled right here. And so what we can do is basically create a new arrangement. And let's do 2 verses, and then let's do the outro, and then the bridge, and then the pre, and then we finish with the intro twice. And so now if I just play it with this arrangement, it'll just jump the playhead to kind of like where each part is. And if we have verse 3 2 times, it'll play it 2 times. But once we're happy with this arrangement, what we can do is click right here and then go with flatten chain. And it'll take a minute, but then it basically changed our entire timeline to what we had selected. And the arranger track is gone and everything is moved. So you don't have to think about it too much. You don't have to cut stuff and then paste time and do things. And I used to use this a lot, especially when you're in your kind of start of building the songs, like, oh, should we do another bridge? Or, oh, should we maybe not do this pre? Or sometimes it's easier to have everything in your arranger track and then you can listen to it. And then once you're actually happy, flatten the chain, it'll do it for you. It's not going to be, if you have any kind of like those MIDI where I showed you before where it's overlapping, see how like here that you don't have any data because it just cut it where you used to have something before but it didn't. If you had our settings before, it would probably do it the way that you wanted to, but it's a really great way to have things moved around really quickly, to make big changes really, really quickly. And yeah, I think it's a great tool just to have in the back of your mind. And then one day you're like, oh, you know, it's a really great way of doing this. And then now you know. So yeah, this is pretty much it. I think this is all the ways that I know how to cut stuff in Cubase. I think it's really great that a DAW like Cubase lets you do even the most basic stuff like cutting in so many different ways, because we all think differently and we all work creatively different in different environments and different industries, and we need to be able to do so many different ways. And so having the right tool to the right scenario can make you that much quicker or think that much more creatively, and you're able to do more things. So I think this is really, really great. Let me know in the comments below which feature you liked the most, or did you learn anything new, or did I miss anything? And then teach me, and I'll be happy to know more ways of doing even the most basic stuff in Cubase, like cutting. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really, really helps. And stay tuned because I'll have more basic, exciting features in Cubase really, really soon. And of course, stay creative, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.